Today from the prophet Isaiah, and we are in the 2nd chapter, beginning with the 1st verse. The word that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be raised above the hills, and all the nations shall stream to it. Many people shall come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for all peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord." This is the word of God for the people of God this day. At this time of year, every year, I begin hearing laments of people all around me. You hear it too. Sometimes we say these laments ourselves. And somehow I become very distressed that I'm hearing this kind of lament, because I think it should not be this way in this great glad season when Christ comes as a baby in a manger. The lament comes in many, many different forms. Some of the lament is about a family member who has passed away during the year. And we understand that sentiment, don't we? We understand that sentiment of people sort of having a sense of regret about having to sit down at the table, the Christmas table, without that person who's been so important in their lives. We understand that deeply. We also have people who have a sense of dread because there seems to be this expectation that everything, every moment of the season be bright and happy. But for one reason or another, they just don't feel that kind of emotion deep within their hearts. Some people express all kinds of concern about the demands upon their time and their energy at this time of year. Probably all of us have said that at one time or another, right? We're thinking ahead, we're thinking about the long list of things that we feel like just has to be done, and we talk about how we're tired already. Many of us feel that way today after the busyness of this week, don't we? Some of the lament is because families dread arguments that they feel like are just inevitably going to come up. They're inevitable because they did it last year, and the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that. Arguments about money that's going to be spent. Any number of things, but there's a lot of arguing about money that's going to be spent. Money to buy decorations and presents, and the argument centers around the fact that already the budget is strapped, and yet here we have to do all of these additional kinds of things. Some folks have a lament about the time that they're going to spend together as extended family. And even though they love one another at the very root of things, they have that way in which every year there's an argument and another argument and another argument. And they feel like there's this sense in which everybody's supposed to be happy and supposed to get along with one another, but somehow it never works out quite that way. Isaiah receives a word from God. And in the passage that we read for today, Isaiah issues the announcement from God. It's an announcement that God will come and will bring a word to them. Now, we hear in this passage that the announcement from God is going to take place on a mountaintop. And in general, we know that Israel has the sense of thinking about God as residing on a mountaintop or residing in a mountain. And we hear over and over in the Old Testament how a word from God takes place from the mountains. But in this passage, we hear that it's not just a little rolling hill. We have a lot of rolling hills in Georgia, don't we? It's not just a little rolling hill. It's not some fairly tall mountain off in the distance, but rather the announcement from God, the teaching from God is going to take place on the highest peak of all. And if we're thinking about Georgia, where would that be? Brasstown Ball, of course, right? The highest peak in Georgia, the one that rises above others. I love to go to that place and hear the park rangers talk about all that's distinctive about Brasstown Ball. And they tell us that it rises up so high in the atmosphere that it creates its own ecosystem. They would remind us of everything that's distinctive about being on Brasstown Ball. They would tell us that in the wintertime, though you might travel to Blairsville or you might go to most points in northern Georgia, you can't necessarily go to the top of Brasstown Ball, can you? Because it snows there when it doesn't snow anywhere else. And so these people of God, were they living in Georgia and were they having this picture of God teaching them from the mountaintop, they would picture Brasstown Ball. Because it's the highest point. It's the mountain that rises above all others. It's the one that is distinctive in life. So when the prophet says it's a high mountain, he's thinking about a huge, impressive peak, one far taller than anything else in the area. And he says that it attracts people to come to it. It attracts people who want to come and take in its glory. But he would remind us that travel to the mountaintop is not simply a pleasure trip. Certainly we all want to go there and take in the beauty and the grandeur and all that's distinctive about the mountaintop. But in this case, the mountaintop is not simply about beauty and grandeur, although that too is included. Instead, being on the mountaintop is about being in the presence of God, or resting at the foot of the mountains and allowing all that God has to say to descend upon our ears. The prophet Isaiah focuses on teaching from God that takes place as people go to the mountaintop. As he talks about that, we might be reminded of other instances like the Moses story, where Moses goes to the mountaintop and receives the word from God. And as Moses comes back down from the mountain, he has the specific word of God in the form of 10 commandments to share with the people. And certainly the 10 commandments are about relationship with God, and they are about relationship with other people. How to live at peace with God and how to live at peace with people around us. So, as folks go to the mountaintop, in this instance, it's not simply individuals, and it's not simply family groups who go, but the prophet says nation after nation after nation go to the mountaintop. They go there to be taught by God. They go there to receive instruction. And as they go there, as they rest in the presence of God, as they hear what God has to say, they are transformed. They are made different people than the people who left home to go to the mountaintop. The transformation that takes place is incredible. It's unimaginable. It's not like anything that they could ever have dreamed would happen. And it's possible only through the power that is found in the Word of God speaking to them. We know that as we read the Old Testament and we get a sense of what life was like, we get a sense of what people were like as we get a sense of what daily times were all about. They were not so different than people today, were they? And their times were not so different than our time today. Rarely in those stories do we find Israel at peace.